First order of business is to approve the minutes from September 24, 2018. Any corrections, additions, deletions?
Move to approve.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Okay, I'm going to move items before the committee number 5 up, and then, because you would like us to approve all 3 at one time. So I'm going to move that up to make sure we have everything so we can approve it all at one time.
You what now?
Didn't you want to approve everything?
I don't really care if we vote on the items together, but I do think we need to review the scoring sheet before we would, and I need some clarification as to whether where that fits, whether we're voting on that as well, since it didn't get itemized on the agenda.
Because we waited till today, I thought. I guess maybe so Councilmember Ortiz could be here.
Absolutely. Plus, there were questions. She wasn't involved in the conversation. We got sent a fair amount to review, and I got detailed to go watch the videos from last year about the set-asides, which were very helpful to not repeat.
Good.
Although, Councilwoman Ortiz, I don't know if you had time to, or you had questions, so.
So the only things we're really voting on is the calendar and the priority sheet anyway, right?
Yeah, but I would, if I may. This is any other items before the committee, that's number 5.
Right. So I didn't know, because we had talked last time, I thought you didn't want to vote until, but if those are the only 2 things we're voting on, period, and then we're just going to talk about the other.
Well, the issue is what's on the scoring sheet, if this is where you were going with that, and anything about that could affect what we would put in the calendar or in the priorities sheet, then it would be helpful to talk about that.
At first.
Certainly first, or and maybe first, actually. I was a little unclear, actually. I think when I asked about the scoring sheet last time, because I recalled us voting on it and sending that to the council as well, my understanding was that was going to be a 3rd item that we voted on this time as well.
Have we ever, we've never voted on that before, have we?
Well, I've been doing this for, since it started, and
But we've
did.
never voted on that in council, on the score sheet?
It's been part of the package that was sent forth in the past. And the reason, which I didn't look to see if it was detailed out in the minutes, the reason was because we needed full transparency about what the criteria were that were being used in this process, so that it was real clear to the council how the committee was going about the decision-making, and with in mind that even though the council would, as it always has in the past, approve the recommendation for budget and the final allocations, that the appeals and any discussion would happen in this committee, and the council wouldn't trump it.
So I think you're both right. The vote is on the allocation and the dollar amount. But Councilmember Hiller is correct in the fact that in the past, part of that packet of material that goes along with that recommendation of a dollar amount and the funding total has included in the past the score sheet.
See, and I was understanding that you just use that to determine your vote for the budget. I didn't know you were actually approving every single thing in the packet.
Well, I don't believe that you are. At the council level, I think that you are voting, in fact, I'm confident that you're voting on the funding amount.
Okay.
And
In
yeah.
the process.
Okay.
And in the process,
The
though,
priorities but the score sheet itself directly correlates to the questions. And so when I am not aware of the committee having modified this, but Corey, please correct me if I'm speaking in error. They have, okay. But anytime you modify any of the questions or not the questions, but the areas on here, you're going to impact the application itself, I guess is what I'm pointing out, because they're tied together.
I just thought that was our role as a committee. That's okay, I don't care.
To
It's okay.
approve this?
I mean, yeah, if we have to approve everything, that's fine. So let's move that up then. So we approve the minutes, so let's just now talk about the items before, any other items before the committee besides the calendar and the priority sheet.
But I think the reason why it's there is so if anything gets brought up, I think your agenda's correct, and then I think that's a proper place to keep it, so we won't forget anything.
But if, like Councilmember Hiller said, if we approve the calendar and then we talk about other items and we have to go back and amend the calendar,
Do we have to do that?
I think she's right. I mean, they may or may not be voted on as a package, but because they are interrelated, then it seemed pointless to vote on any of them until we process through all of them. I think a way that we've done it before is to go through them one at a time and come to sort of a tentative consensus to set it aside, go to the next one, and until it's fully worked. And then if they are all congruent when we get done, it's easy to vote on them as a package. If there's a need to go back through and adjust one of them because of some discussion in a later one, then it makes it just a little more straightforward if we haven't voted on it yet, haven't done a final vote. So
Okay.
In terms of the agenda, Director Hahn also prepared for us a job description that it seemed, or whatever we want to call it, qualifications that we ought to just at least have a look at and see if it's what we thought and give her some feedback on that. I don't know that we need to vote on it, but just to review it. And also, I didn't know whether there was going to be time in this meeting, depending on how it went, but before we finish all of our work, I went back through my notes and I'd like us to address whether we want to suggest pulling the utilities over into the nonprofit agency, the Helping Service Agency Administration.
the what? Utilities?
We have 3 different programs where the city provides money and helps people with utilities.
And they have to apply for a grant for that?
No.
We contract out the administration of them, and right now it's being administered by by an agency that doesn't do any other direct service.
Mhm.
And as we've talked about what we're doing here, there's been some conversation about whether we should have our, the helping agencies that do food, medicine, utilities all the time, handle those as well. I just wanted to ask about
So
it, but it doesn't need to get in the middle of this.
Finance is currently in the process of soliciting proposals for that
Really?
program. So I don't know that it'll remain with the agency that it's with, I don't know. But there's an RFP out currently for that program.
Aren't there 3? I mean, they're kind of all related, but we have the Roundup program, we have the franchise fee.
Franchise fee is the one that I'm referring to. I could be wrong, but I think Roundup is administered out of the water department.
Directly out of the water
I
department.
believe so.
I just wanted to refresh on that, and I didn't know, and if that's already underway, that's,
Yeah, finance does have an RFP out there currently for the franchise fee rebate program
okay.
for folks. Again, I believe the Roundup program is right out inside the utilities department, and in all likelihood, that has to do with the way that that funding comes back into the city. It would be difficult to contract with that if folks are on a monthly basis contributing. I'm making an assumption there.
I don't want to keep this out of order. It would be worth checking. Corey, maybe are they using a third party to actually handle it, or do you recall if they're doing it?
The Roundup?
Yeah.
I don't recall.
No, they're not. Comes directly from the water.
Okay, if that's all in that department and it ain't broken, it's working fine, then fine. I just didn't want to get the agenda out of order. I just had wanted to inquire about those.
But what's the third one, if I may?
Didn't-
I only know of the 2.
Well, that may be it, besides what we give out through here, and that may be, in my head, the third. because we provide money for utilities through the social service block grant as well. I wasn't suggesting merging them, I just thought that would be cleaner. We've underspent in the franchise fee one the last couple of years, and my guess is because it's not where people are used to accessing it, so. Did the RFP go out to the agencies that normally do the
Yes.
distribution? Excellent.
Okay.
Well,
So-
that's a segue, but I guess it's done, thank you.
So then we want to put the other items will be now, correct? So any other items? So we're on that one. That was another item. Do you have anything else for
Well, if you
the
want to do the job
spreadsheet, the
description,
scorings,
and
the
that'd
job
be fine.
description?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
So we're doing what now?
The one, there's a little tab, reviewer criteria. So 3 to 5 member committee comprised of volunteers. I would suggest 5. Do you have any thoughts on that? 3 to 5? Do you have
5's a
number?
good number. I would just say, let's make sure it's not an even number.
Right.
It's a odd number. That way,
Right.
somebody can save the day or
Yeah.
break the
Mhm.
day.
I
But
think
yeah.
as we worked on the calendar, we agreed to say 3 to 5.
Hmm.
And so this should match, and it does. I personally think that leaving it the 3 to 5 is better. One of the things that I'll have a few questions about that staff reported to us was that it took the committee a tremendously long time this year. And if that's because there were 5 people instead of 3, I think that's something for us to consider with not, the staff has to get 5 people in one place at one time instead of 3.
Was it-
And train them up and help them sync up their answers, so
If I may.
Sure.
I think we talked through that before.
Was it that, or was it trying to get volunteers?
It was both.
Yep.
Or both?
It's difficult to get volunteers to commit that amount of time because it's at least 40 hours of time, so it's a whole week's worth of spending time. But the main part is just reading the application, taking the time to read all the applications. So, but finding 5 people, a little bit harder than finding 3, but it's, your call.
I think because this is such a large amount of money, it impacts a lot of people, and 3 just seems too small of an amount to me. I don't know why. I just think more people
Well-
gives more input.
What would we do if they can't find 5?
Do you think you can find 5?
No, I'm just saying, what would we do? So that kind of leaves them a little room. I think they're hearing us say, we would like to keep it at 5, but what if they can't find 5?
As long as there's not 2 that staff, 1 volunteer. So when you talk about 3 to 5, are you talking staff people too?
No.
Oh, no.
This is,
So is this
this is
that-
that volunteer
Outside.
positions in that first
Right.
sentence is.
So who was on last year? I mean, how many, were there staff?
No.
We had 4 and then you. 4 and
4 and then, okay, so there was counting 1 staff last year
But we still had that odd number total.
that were, okay.
I don't think we've ever, except when we had like a big citizen group, which there was lots of input, but the people were not familiar with outputs, they were not familiar with the social service network, and so it allowed a lot of process, but it didn't give necessarily that professional level of evaluation. One of the things that we've done with this application, or that we've certainly tried to, the committees, past and present, and the staff, have made it pretty darn tight, so that it's a fairly technical review, although I'll have a couple questions about outside knowledge. I think that Sasha did a great job on the guidelines, and so.
Okay, and you can leave it there, but I'd hope for 5.
We will make that the goal,
Okay.
for sure.
But like Councilmember Ortiz said, if you can't find them, at least
I
you
just-
have some leeway.
I don't want us to go a year without doing
Right.
it or getting to, or then we start throwing people in there either.
Yeah, good
Right.
point.
Right, quality over quantity.
Okay, committee members should have 5 or more years of experience in the grant arena. Experience can include professional grant writer, professional grant administrator, professional grant maker within an organization. What's the difference between professional grant writer and professional grant maker?
So a grant writer, obviously, writes the
Right.
application, applies for. A grant maker would be like, we are grant makers or administrators, yes. We're grant makers, so Rochelle would be a good example of a grant maker, right? We offer grant funding and then she monitors those grantees in that process. That's a grant maker.
Okay,
Or like, yeah.
working
And-
with, okay.
Yes, and then a grant administrator, in some agencies, you can have one person that writes the applications for the grant and then another person that actually administers that program.
Okay,
So-
understand?
For instance, would be, there was one this year who was with the Federal Home Loan Bank who had done the grant. They were a grant maker. I don't know if she'd ever
Yes.
written grants before, but she was a grant maker.
Okay, any comments on that one?
Where's our grant writer?
She's usually at these meetings, but I do not know if she had a conflict.
I mean, where's she in this, does she help with this process?
She helps with, on the training side of the, like, training for grantees. And she could help us provide training for our reviewers. But she's, typically at that training level is how we utilize her. We do trainings with her for, most recently for like the neighborhood groups. We've offered grant writing training for them that she's put on for us.
She did assist a couple agencies last year with some outputs and outcomes type training, so we offer her up to the agencies if they need some assistance with that. We do use her for that too.
Okay, committee members with affiliation with any organization receiving grant funds from the city must have been separated from the organization for at least 1 year. Comments on that one?
That's good.
Preference will be given to those individuals with experience in social service provision or social service grant arenas. Comments on that?
I think it's important, I'll have some process questions related to that, but when people are familiar with the service providing and the clientele and who the agencies are, it helps them have a little more perspective on what they're seeing on paper.
An emphasis on experience and outcomes and outputs in performance-based grants. Comments on that? Looks good?
Anything that, I think it's good, but is there anything either of you see to add?
Nope, looks good to me.
And this works for you in terms of some framework, but not anything that's so specific and no performance standards.
Okay. Any other items before the committee?
Well, do you want to work on
Yeah, whatever item. I don't have any other
the
items.
scoring sheet and the applications then? Okay.
If you have.
I do have some questions. It ties in, did we decide we are going to vote on the scoring sheet and send the scoring sheet forward for sure again this year?
Yes, like a packet.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then that will, I think that's good. I did watch the committee meeting tapes. Staff sent us a sample of the 2019 application that I looked through, and we already had from a prior meeting the scores. One of the things that we're responsible for is to have a good process in place and to be able to defend the best we can that it was accurate, that the process worked. And I did end up with some questions. So I'm looking at the service scoring sheet and then the one sample application that we had.
Okay. Which is the last thing in our packet, right? And it's the score sheet. Okay.
the score sheets at the end of the
In the
sample.
packet, okay, so we don't need it, so we have
Oh, wait a
this.
minute, I don't know if the sample, yes.
Yep,
Organization example is the sample proposal from this year.
okay,
So you can see how the questions actually get asked. I don't know that we ever have had, is there an instruction sheet that goes to the reviewers that syncs up which questions they're supposed to look at to do the scoring?
We have created that, yes.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay. Could you briefly describe that to us? And also perhaps after that, just, you indicated that you'd done a debrief with the reviewers.
Mhm.
And I was eager to hear what comments they'd had, particularly since it sounded like it was a pretty long,
Mhm.
a lot of time.
Okay, so Rochelle has created a document that says on specific questions or the score, on the score sheet, it'll say see page 5 for this question.
Okay.
So that will be, that's new this year, so she'll have that ready for the reviewers this year to make sure that everybody is pulling from the right areas on the application. We just think it'll help them with ease and maybe make the process go a little bit faster. So Rochelle has created that.
Okay.
So that'll be new for this coming one. It's not been used before?
It has not been used
Okay.
before, no. That was a suggestion actually from the reviewers.
Well, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, so.
Good.
And then as far as the reviewer comments, we didn't have a whole lot, just that the main one was the time commitment, and we already knew that, so. We had one reviewer that suggested that we needed some scoring on the budget. We had reviewers discuss that some of the agencies are still struggling with outputs and outcomes, it appeared, and so that was a suggestion. And then a reviewer mentioned it was difficult for them to understand how the need associates with the outcome. So the need on the need for the program versus what their actual outcome was. And then one suggestion, which Rochelle's already working on, is the application should line up with the score sheet. So when they're scoring the application, I don't know if you've been on EC Impact, but applications here, score sheets kind of over here on the side, and tying them together so they are not scrolling up and down on either one. So we're working on that with EC Impact now. So, and those were the suggestions.
Well, I wondered about that as I worked to choose the score sheet and the one sample app. I wondered how things were being connected, and I thought maybe that did take them some time and questions of use. So I'm really glad to hear that progress. I'll go ahead and ask the questions that I had. Maybe they've been answered with that relational sheet that Rochelle just did.
And it's still in progress, but it's pretty much done.
Okay, because for instance, on the capacity of the organization, that's the only place you could possibly be considering your budget and anything to do with budget.
Which sheet are you on?
She just, I didn't bring an application.
You didn't bring the
I didn't
scoring
bring an
sheets?
application. Oh, I guess, okay.
Sorry. I'm right here. So which sheet, because I've got two, I've got social services scoring sheet and then youth and social services and contracted services scoring sheet. So which score sheet are you looking at? Does it say at the top?
None of them are dated.
No,
But
does it say at the?
This one says social
This is
services.
2014.
Oh, okay. Tracking now.
Scoring,
Okay.
yeah.
Now I'm on this.
I marked
got it.
mine, yeah.
Okay.
So, no, I was using the current one. I looked
Okay,
back
got it.
at some of how we'd done it before, because I was on the committee in 2014 when we did that one. There's no place that talks about the budget. You said that was a recommendation. What was your thought about that? Or was there some thought that budget and capacity and history was included somehow in this first 10-point question?
So I think that the budget is looked at as far as the capacity in a vague term, it's hard to look at somebody's budget when you're not in that agency doing the budget. It's hard to look at it and say, I'm gonna work with 100 people, I'm gonna work with 5 people for the same amount of money. Is that cost effective? Difficult to determine that by a written document. And so I think that's kind of why we don't have any more specific questions on the scoring sheet related to that, mainly for that.
How would you see using the budget? What are you gonna do with it? What information would?
Well, the example of, there's so many fingers and toes to this. When I reviewed the committee's discussion last year, there was a lot of talk about targeting dollars where they make the most difference. Personally, it all kind of comes out in the wash, so whether our dollars are targeted at the admin part of somebody's budget or at the direct services part of their budget, I'm not that worried about. But the agency that we have as an example is very well run, and obviously was working in terms of management as well to save money. In both years that were the history years in this one, they had more money left at the end of the year than we gave them in their grant. And so when you look at whether they need the money, they were cautious in budgeting some of their revenue sources, which you should be. I've been in that chair. But for the year that they were asking us for an increase from, they also indicated in their budget text that they were saving money by moving in their operation and with some partners and consolidating some overhead. So to me, it's reasonable for a reviewer to look at whether, and we had a little conversation about this last time, whether they, quote, need the money. Just because we have funded them in the past doesn't mean that they need it as much as some other program does in the future. We had some agencies that, when United Way changed their priorities and went from funding core budget the way we do, kind of across the board, to targeting to certain developmental programs, there were agencies that we have that lost funding from United Way. What's now Positive Connections was one of them, and that was mentioned in her letter. And so there's some big picture things to look at in terms of how we would prioritize dollars, or whether we want to remain locked into a situation of basically the way this is set up, funding the same agencies year after year, because there's no way for a new agency to get in. We're just hardly, they kind of have to not perform and get dropped off to make room. Even so, if there was a way to look at that, I just wasn't sure whether people were already being directed now, or whether there was. Did you have a comment?
Well, I guess my comment would be, Karen, is they're all nonprofit.
Exactly.
So to look at their budget and say, hey, you're over, how do we know who gave or what fundraiser they did? I mean, we're asking.
It's in there. I mean, the total fundraise money is in there.
But I mean, we don't know when in the year that they're doing fundraisers, is what I'm saying. So if they end up with a budget that's over, it could be because they had a big fundraiser at Christmas time or whatever. I mean, I think that's a little bit unfair to say, we want to see your budget to see if you need our money or not, because, you know, we're screaming. I constantly tell people, think outside the box and, you know, don't look at this money, but think outside the box and see what kind of fundraisers that you could do or have. And people are doing that more. But, I mean, I think it's a bit unfair. If you look, I mean, you know, if you look at my bank account, I might spend all year, but towards the end of the year, I'm trying to wait, you know, or, I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Because I know I might have this coming in or that coming in. I think that's the same with them. I think when you look at Heidi and they're struggling. Meals on Wheels are struggling. They're struggling for volunteers. They're struggling for the food. I think that was a great thing that they thought enough to go in with Midland. You know, because Midland they're thinking outside the box. They're growing. You know, I think that was, and we serve the same people. So I'm just got a little cautious about maybe looking at their budget and kind of determining that. I don't think if they needed the money, they wouldn't apply for it.
You always ask for it. I just wondered, I have a question regarding what we say at the end of this services scoring sheet. It says, the ECD committee may choose not to recommend any agency or programs, any new programs, or may fund programs with provisos. And I had asked before the last meeting, we used to have a phrase like that in the application, and it's not there anymore, but it is here. It's the staff's interpretation that this allows the committee, if there's outside information that they're aware of, or, like the budget information or whatever it might be.
The score
say-
sheet is in the RFP,
Right.
so they
And
would
so
have
that's-
it there.
Uh-huh. So is it your understanding that if there are major changes,
I think that statement would be something that you guys that would be kind of a policy thing, where if you saw something in an application and you wanted, I don't think a reviewer is going to disregard the score sheet and not use the score sheet as planned without some guidance from you to the contrary, so.
But an example of where you guys have done this in the past would be in 2016, that CRC was awarded funding on a probationary basis because their score was not high enough for them to meet that threshold, but the committee chose to fund them for one more year and see what the next
Correct.
application score looked like, and then after that following. So that's an example of how that statement has been used. You chose to make an exception for CRC in that year. And if I could just make one statement about the budget, I mean, we'll put in here whatever request for budget information that you all want, but I think that it would be very dangerous to assume that staff is qualified to make to score people's budgets across the breadth of services and programs that this grant program offers funding to, number one. And I would squeal even louder if you wanted our volunteers to make those kinds of budgetary judgment calls, in my opinion, about scoring people's budgets. I think the way that you ensure that folks are using their money right is that they meet the outputs and the outcomes that they tell you in their application that they're going to provide for the community. And if they don't, then that shows up in the next year's application process, and so it all catches up with itself, and we are able to, those are objective things that we can measure, whereas looking at someone's budget on paper is a little more subjective, because as a staff person, I could tell you all about our budget, but I can't tell you about Boys and Girls Club or any of these other agencies that are here, because I don't work there, and those are not my areas of expertise.
well, I couldn't figure out a way to put it in exactly. I know that most processes, United Way, government grants, and so on, all do review that and score people on that in terms of other sources. I understand those concerns, and that's why it drilled back to asking the question about whether it's linked with this very first question in your instructions to them. Because if I were a volunteer, I would see all this budget information, which is very good information. And for somebody who knows how to look at a budget, you see a lot in there. You can figure it out for a nonprofit management. So
I don't think that the city needs to be concerned with a nonprofit's budget to see where it's going and why they have money. I think they have their board of directors for that. They are a nonprofit that's, I don't see us as being the whistleblowers or the overarching agency that needs to look at the nonprofits and determine you don't need this money,
I think when you back up from it, the issue is that we have a limited amount of money that we want to get targeted at where it will get the most important or biggest, depending on the entity, bang for the buck. And so, I mean, I just to share with you a little, I mean, I go back over 30 years in social service funding here. Things change. United Way, for instance, recently made a drastic change in its priorities, and it's done that before. And when that happens, it makes a difference in agencies that may be doing very good programs. For instance, if you're doing a lot of prevention, but United Way has decided that it wants to do emergency aid, and it's going to prioritize how they're going to fund based on emergency aid, then the prevention programs can end up getting cut in order to fund emergency aid. Most recently, the agencies that were funded citywide lost out because there was a focus on the youth development programs in East Topeka, and I may not have phrased that very well. Periodically, what's happened is that the city and the county and United Way have gotten together and said, county, why don't you fund these and we won't, and we'll fund these and you don't have to. You take the alcohol and drug as well. And so things can just get out of whack in terms of what's available, or maybe there's a new federal program and all of a sudden there's federal dollars available for a program that didn't used to be available. And so the pressure on filling in that gap with local money isn't as great. Maybe that just gets done with the priorities, and maybe the $25,000 cap takes care of some of that, but did want to just kind of raise those issues. On the board leadership, that has come up, it came up in comments. I think it needs to stay there. I think in the committees have each year before. What I noticed by looking at the application is that we don't have Hispanic in there anymore. We only have race.
Well, Hispanic is not an ethnicity, right?
No, it is.
It's not an ethnicity. I learned that when I came here.
It's an overlay that gets used in the census and gets used to identify.
It's ethnicity, but they have.
It's
Oh, it's not a
ethnicity, but it's
race.
not
No,
race.
It's not a race.
She had to explain this to me before.
Right, but
Such a
by
dumb
not
race.
asking it at all, we're not getting the full picture of the diversity of boards or of clientele. And I thought that we probably ought to add
It
that
is,
in.
it is on there.
Down there.
Which one?
It's in the application,
What page is that?
page 11.
Oh, it is.
Page 4, it's not in there on the board one that we scored.
I think it got cut off on page 10. I think it got cut off, it's down here.
Where is it on the
Oh, you
clientele?
can't see it.
It's not there.
It didn't print. This is our.
It's on page 10 at the bottom, but I think it got cut off, but.
Oh, it's that
Yeah.
box, that
Yeah.
half a box? Okay.
Well, it's the next page. Look at the next page.
The next page starts with white, which is pretty, oh, I
And
see.
then the Hispanic. There you go.
Got it.
Got it? All right.
Okay. And so, well, that Hispanic is over there on the,
Oh, okay, I see.
okay. Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Couldn't find it.
Yeah, it's on there.
So the 15% then is, okay, got that one then. On outputs and outcomes, which are on the second page of the scoring sheet. When they are looking at outputs, which would be your client numbers, and I don't want to, since Meals on Wheels was picked out, or Heidi was kind enough to say we could share it, they'll be the examples that I have just because I have them here. It's just an observation, we really don't put anything about in there about the racial and ethnic spread on the clients. So there was an assumption that as long as the board was representative, it would kind of, we could look at it, but that would be where we would measure, is that right? I wondered though, in terms of outputs being identified and achievable, in this particular application, the nonprofit served 1,329 people in 2017. And then they proposed in 2018, which is current year, only 1,000. And we're proposing only 1,000 again for 2019. There is no explanation for why that drop would be there. Obviously, it's easier to hit 100% of your goal if you always set a goal that's less than you did the year before. Has there been any conversation or training with the agencies or the volunteers?
No, I mean, the only thing would be on that is we would be looking at whether or not they achieved their outputs and outcomes on the prior year. So we would be scoring that. I think a reduction of 83, when you're talking about 1,000 isn't very much.
No, that's a reduction of 2,229, it's 15%.
Oh, okay.
Isn't it 1,100? I have 1,100.
Okay.
1,100 is what's projected for
Right.
2019.
They had done 1,329 the year before.
Right.
And so then they
It's 200.
dropped it for the current year and matched that dropped number for the future year.
Which I don't know that we can answer that on the fly. If we were able to look back at, say, their quarterly reports or information like that, we might be able to speculate. Maybe they dropped it because they weren't meeting that 1,300 number. But I don't think we can provide you with an answer of what led to the reduction here.
And what would you do with the information if you had that? What would it matter? What would?
Maybe with the cap that the committee recommended last year of the 25,000, it's not as critical, but what I see is score creep to where everybody's gonna score 95 because they lowball their projections so that they make sure they're at 100% or greater of their they figure out how to work our grant, I guess. I don't blame them, done the same thing. Yet at that point, it's not as valuable. You know, a 15% drop in clients is a big drop. We can't tell because we only have prior, current, and future, what the trends were from the years before. And I wondered if that was the kind of things like that had been included in the kinds of questions that the volunteers were asking.
So the scores specifically on this area, so that you guys understand, they're looking at the last full 12-month year where they would have had all 4 quarters reported, which in this case would have been 2017, because we did this application process in 2018. So the last year that was fully completed and all 4 quarters were reported was 17.
So
Just not arguing or
Got
counterpointing
it.
anything you said, just to point out that's what this is scored on, because that's one of those areas where Rochelle is providing the score because she has the quarterly reports.
So if they had perhaps put 1,100 in their proposal the year before and slam dunked it, we don't have an expectation that they would, I mean, sometimes there's a hurricane or something and you have a whole bunch of clients in one year that you didn't have before and you're not gonna have again. But sometimes if your capacity is there and the need is there in the community, you would expect a number to be sustained.
I think sometimes we have to trust them. We just have to, if we're going to offer money and they're going to fill out the grant and it's going to be scored and it's going to be approved by the council, we just have to trust that.
In terms of outputs and outcomes, and again, this is just an example, and there might be back information that would explain it, but our outcomes are supposed to be reasonable. People get a total of 35 points for their outcomes and their outputs. This agency got 35 out of 35, but it had 15% less clientele in current year and the future year. In terms of the outcomes, their outcomes were, I think, the outcome statement was that the clients would report a home-delivered meal enhances their independence, nutritional intake, and health. Outcome measure was 85% of the clients would report that the meals are their most important source of nutrition. That's important, makes sense, and likely that pretty much everybody would. The next one said 85% will report that their health is the same or better since they began receiving meals. In both cases, they were expecting, the way the chart is, that 100% of the clients, even though their goal was, or it's 85 on the 1,100 clients, they're reporting that under the outcomes chart that 100% of their clients in 2017 achieved, I assume, both goals. I just was having trouble toggling between the outputs and the outcomes, and I wondered if somebody misunderstood. I mean, if you meet or beat your numbers for your clients, that's your outputs, but your outcomes should be measured by client reporting in this case, although the data would show whether or not, it's unlikely that 100% of their clients sustain their health.
It says that they collect their information from existing clients, is where that's their data source and data collection.
That is what they reported, 100%.
And 100% maintain their health,
Th-
maintain
that-
or improve their health in
The
the
same
course of
or
the
better,
year.
the same or better. That's what they reported.
Given that these are very low-income senior at-risk clients, that seemed unlikely to me, was my point. And I didn't know if the volunteers had asked questions about that.
They did not.
Because one of the reasons we're asking volunteers that are really experienced in that area to help is if those 100% is rare on any outcome.
Possible, but
I know,
rare.
yeah, that means you're just kind of calling them a liar. Like, well, I don't see this as possible, so, I think you're lying. I just feel real uncomfortable doing that. We have so many people looking at these that I don't think that's what we should be doing.
No, we're responsible to know that these questions are measuring what we wanted, and that they're asking, and that the scores that are in here are
And so
reflective of.
So evidently, for many years now, it has been.
I haven't read the applications compared to the scoring in probably 4 years, so this was just a sample, which I really
No, but other
appreciate.
people have. So, I mean, and it felt okay to them, I guess.
Somebody who's experienced in outcomes, I mean, the 85% is, if that's from their experience, that's good. But to turn around and actually report 100% is very unlikely. If you are actually collecting your surveys, maybe on your reports,
So
do you
who do
get
you,
how many surveys they had and actually the
If that's
results?
what they say they're going to report on,
Uh-huh.
yeah, they would tell me.
I mean, we do not get 1,300 surveys. They report that to
number.
us.
Understood.
Yeah, quarterly.
That's why I asked, I mean, if
Okay.
they tell you how many surveys they actually got and what the replies were.
They report on the outcomes.
I mean, one of the reasons they build into their system, the partners that they have, like with police and fire and the mailman and so on, is that often something does happen and somebody has health incidents. And they've got a pretty good network to make sure that as much as they can, they catch that and intervene so that people don't die, get sicker or whatever. So it's just unlikely that there's 100% health improvement in that population. So I would think that our reviewers would be catching that.
I guess my question would be how would they then score that? We would just automatically assume that it didn't happen? I mean, like, how would we put that as a reviewer? What
They'd
should
need to
we,
put, they'd
how
need
should
to
we
view a
direct them?
note, I would think, but if they had a concern about what was being reported,
Okay,
then they should make that observation, because that's why we ask experts in the field to be looking at these things.
okay.
We also had comments from some of the testimony about the collaboration and partnerships. They really did a great job with that, but I would think almost everybody does have at least 6 partners or collaborators that they refer to and from or work with, and so I didn't think that one was a problem. I wanted to react to that. Also then, forgive me if I asked this before, and again, we've had this issue with the group. The example I used last time was when we had all the senior citizen agencies, and they all were under a planning directive from the Jayhawk Area Agency on Aging that they needed to make decisions by October of that particular year on collaborating and reducing the need for the vans and using public transportation instead. And we added the question on program evaluation and planning to try and draw them out to share those kinds of things with us in the future. Because no one had reported to us. They just asked us all for money for their transportation program. But we did find out in the course of the testimony that was there. So if the reviewers have knowledge from their experience in the community about facts that should have been shared, they have the ability to give a note to you that would be passed along.
Mm-hmm.
So then you, if the committee needs to hear that information, you would share that.
Sure.
Okay. Just wanted to suggest that, and related to that one, on page 3 of the sample application, where we do ask people about whether they're doing reviews, we could add to the if yes, please describe, and just continue a little bit with that and say, and describe any changes recommended and or under consideration. Could be just one sentence, but that would be enough to give the committee a little more information.
Doesn't it say, yeah, if yes, please describe? So we were asking them to describe it. I guess I'm confused about what you're asking us to add. There's already a place that says, if yes, please describe.
I thought that was enough too. And if you do, then they shared that they'd been working with a consultant and just kind of generalized on some potential savings and efficiencies. Again, I think back over the years to when there were some pretty big things going on and we didn't find out. If you think that's enough, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure. Let me look and see. On a place like on page 10 and 11, where we're reporting age groups and income.
Where's income? Oh, right here.
Income's on page 11. Would reviewers have asked you, I mean, if they've got, out of their 1,170, over 75 are below 60 years old, their description talks only about seniors, and so,
What's a senior?
right. I wasn't sure.
60 or over, right? Looks like according to the application itself, 60 or over.
Right.
And I'm making an assumption here, but I'm betting those 72 are disabled folks
That's
that
what I
are
was thinking.
shut-ins or.
That was my
unable-
guess too, and then I looked back to the need and the purpose for their program, and it appeared to be only seniors, and so I just didn't know. And the income level to have 136, that was not unknown, but I guess over income.
Well, the, other, right, so we don't know if that's below,
Be over 80 probably.
over 80, or if it's below the lowest. I think we don't know that, right? At, or, well, I guess at or below,
Yeah.
so it would capture that. So I don't know, but if they're income qualifying their folks, that's this is their program. We don't require that the funding that we provide is not only provided to programs that income qualify folks. So I don't know that, I mean, I can tell you just by looking at this section, we're probably capturing this related to our CDBG funds, right? Because those income levels at 30%, 50%, and 80% of LMI those are HUD terms.
Mhm.
So we're probably capturing that information for our HUD reporting requirements and audits and whatnot.
Well, but also for the council's intention to help people that really need it, I'm sure.
Yeah, but we don't require that the programs that we fund are income qualified programs. But I'm.
Not specifically, but that's just the intent. It's always been pretty clear, the intent of the council. Okay, I think those were the kinds of questions I had about process.
In the scoring sheet and everything?
Yes, and particularly with the staff's interpretation on the phrase there at the bottom of the second page allows the committee
Yes, ma'am.
to communicate questions.
Yes, ma'am?
Corey, I had asked you in a previous, or the application, a previous meeting, when they signed their name and give us all their contact information, if there was a space available for another person that we contact.
There is, we
there
have,
is.
Are you talking about when we contact the agencies for like reports or something? I'm sorry,
Well,
just.
you know, I think it was Midland that came up and said that the person that was doing the grant, that was Betty Hunt, had passed away, unfortunately. I mean, and she was the one doing it, so they never got any of the information or that they needed to turn this, that, or that in.
We looked into that and we had sent it to 3 people at Midland. 3 different staff.
From
were
the
able-
start?
Yeah.
Okay, but.
At least 2 people will always be notified of emails.
But do we ask for that in the application?
Do we ask for that in the application?
They can put, like, they'll have like a director and then a contact person, so it's kind of up to them if they choose. I always recommend that we have at least 2 people, so I can stress that at the training that they need to
I would
have.
just like to see it in, if it's not in the application
It is.
process,
Look on the front page.
that we make sure that we get that and make them fill it out as opposed to, make that a part of the process. Where are you looking at?
Yeah,
On the
so
first page.
yeah,
Page 12,
it's got agency director kind of right up there toward the top, and then down toward the bottom, it says primary contact, where they could list, I mean, we're gonna ask them who the director is, so we would always be contacting the director that they list, and then whoever they list as their primary
I
contact.
think
if
I'm
that's
looking at the wrong thing.
Look at your
different-
example, board example.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Here we go.
Okay. And then primary contact, but then we had the director.
Yeah, where they could list them separately, but we could, I mean, we could, ensure, and it sounds like Rochelle's already doing that we have at least 2 different people as contacts in the agency.
And I would put, I think, Rochelle, what I would do is put, they cannot be the same 2. Like here Heidi's put herself as the director and then the primary contact. And I would say we cannot do that, because unfortunately that happened. It wasn't our fault, but to prevent that, I mean, because it's like, oh my God, you guys don't understand. This is what happened. But that way, we just have that, you know, cross-reference there and make them put it down, as opposed to, so it falls back on them, you know, some type of responsibility. And I'm sure it, you know, if something was to happen to one of the grant writers, they don't know all the grants, or, you know, if they're not, depending on how their agency is. But that was just very important to me.
We can
was a
make that change on EC Impact, that's not a problem.
We could, we'll change it to that bottom one to say secondary contact information, then we'll put in parentheses other than executive director.
There you go.
So that we've
But-
got 2.
And because I did ask her, I know she called me and talked to me specifically, and I did say, well, did you guys have a, and I hadn't seen this, that's why I asked the question. Did we have a correct email address? I mean, was everything up to date? And she didn't know, you know, so I just wanted, and I said, well, I mean, I will make sure that it's in the next one, you know, if it's not. So that way, we can kind of get back in touch with them.
Okay.
I'm thinking you might want 3 rather than just to change this out, because, you know, Meals on Wheels is really small. So the executive director is probably the grant writer and the grant administrator, and so she is all those people. But in another agency, there would be an executive director, which of course you always want, and there would be the program director or the grant administrator, depending on how they're structured, and that's going to be the primary person that Rochelle is expecting to work with, right? Whoever it says is primary contact information.
And that was another thing. I don't want it to be so that there's, you know, we need one contact person, you know, but you understand that we're working with, but then we need to contact those 2 people if something like that happens.
Right, if we're not getting.
Right. I don't want to get so many that, you know, they're just assuming, because, you know, if I email all 3 of you guys, all 3 of you can say, well, Rochelle, I thought you took care of it, and I thought you took care of it. I mean, we need to stick with that main person, unless when we don't hear stuff, you know, then we can kind of say, hey, you know.
But it could be, if I may, that the place for that is on the contract, where you've got the primary person and then they list an alternate. For one thing, a year will have passed, and for another thing, that backup for whoever the primary grant administrator is.
And that also
could
goes
be-
with if that person leaves that agency, you know. I mean, I don't know if you guys say this is the grant process time, or if you send something out, I don't know
Well,
that.
that's a good idea on the contract, because then we could capture if the staff has changed, or, yeah.
I mean, the backup might be somebody's executive assistant, you know, if it's, or.
We'll get that in there
Because
for
the
sure.
structures are so different. You know, for some, that might be a multi-city agency where the executive director is somebody in Hutch or something like that even.
Yeah, I have those.
Well, sure.
Yep.
And so we want the local person, you know, they're the lead on here. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, anything else before the committee? I feel good that we've vetted, that we've looked at this, that we have answered questions, and we've, you know, made sure that we're comfortable with this.
I
I'm glad.
apologize, I had to take that. The only
Yes.
other thing, if I may, and I know there was mention about the numbers lining up. Did we get that taken care of on the score sheet?
Yeah,
Somebody had
we had distributed the wrong copy to you.
Oh,
but
was
it's
that
all-
what, okay, those 2 things stuck out in my mind. And I did read in the minutes that staff felt really good about the timeline or timetable, is that correct? I think sometimes that helps us keep us on our feet. I apologize for not being at our last meeting, I had a family emergency and I wasn't, it was like right before the meeting, so I apologize, but I want to commend staff for hearing our concerns, and we just want this to be the best that it could be, and as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
For the calendar and the priorities.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right, is where you're
Yeah,
at.
for the calendar, the priorities,
I,
so we can take this to the council.
can we review with Councilwoman Ortiz each one of them before we would move to
Each
vote?
one of,
The timeline and the priorities, so if there.
I did read through those, Karen.
Okay,
I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay with what we have.
I have one thing on each one.
Okay.
On the timeline, we just clarified earlier that the priorities and the process and the budget recommendation would go forward before the end of the year. Should we, just for clarification, insert the word priorities and process in there? That's 3 documents.
It's up to you guys. You're talking about in the second block under that first heading, it says communication.
Mm-hmm.
Request.
Whatever you want.
That's
If you
fine.
want us to add process, we surely can.
I think that's enough to cover what we talked about.
Are you saying request for process release February 11th?
No.
No.
She's talking about city council adopts priorities and budget recommendation, and she wants us to add priorities, process, and budget recommendation.
I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
Okay.
And that'll just help clarify that they're the 3. I do think, by the way, we'll get to the budget one next, but the staff did put a budget amount as opposed to what it would cost if everybody got $25,000 this time. And I think that will help really resolve some of the concerns that you had about process and when the committee would change. Because with this, that means that this committee would make recommendations that would be accepted by the council before our terms end, and that means that the whole next year's process is set.
Yeah.
And then the new committee just carries it out, and then they get to review and make recommendations for the next year. Just kept thinking about what was troubling you about it, and I think maybe this more accurate number will help.
So what would that number be?
Well, what they put in there is 440.
440. That, we got that from finance.
Okay.
So right from the budget
All right,
office.
Nick? Okay.
But the 440 matched, when we did the correction regarding East Topeka Council on Aging and added that to what staff had proposed at first, we actually allocated $273 last year. So that number basically matches what we did this time.
Sure,
Correct.
and so Nick told us at the last meeting that given the, property tax projections and projections that they're doing in the budget office, that he wouldn't be recommending any additional funding, so that's why you've got 440 in there as your dollar amount and then, again, this is all marked up for 20. This is next year's sheet that we're proposing.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but that, instead of just putting a big number in there that floats, if we are recommending that, then that's the number that would come forward for consideration when the budget gets built for 2020.
Yes, that's
Correct.
what we're proposing for
Mhm.
2020 is $440,000, yes.
Because that was the actual from last year.
That's not only because, but really because the guy that does the budget back there said 440 is what he will recommend to the body. So even if we came in and said, we're gonna make a recommendation of $1 million, he's gonna stand up and say 440 is what you guys can afford.
So we may have to raise then it up to 95%. Okay, right? If everyone, okay, got it.
Yes, depending on how the application scores shake out next year.
So if this is, right, so if
Because
this
they've
is
been
our,
getting better and better.
right, so if this is our only amount of money, then we're gonna have to make that match this, not the money match that.
That's right.
Not
So
the money
that's
matched the
important for us
grants.
to know and have
Okay.
understood before it goes out. In terms of those dollars, then, the other big discussion we had was whether we should continue to grandfather
Oh,
the
that's
two
right.
agencies. Right?
And do you have, yes, you watched the,
Who are the two agencies?
If you look in the middle of the sheet, it was the Shawnee County Medical Society for Healthcare Access at $50,000, and Positive Connections at
55.
$35,000 for the match for their dollars.
I guess my question would be, why were they grandfathered in?
Go ahead.
see, it's hard to answer that. You just have to kind of watch the,
Well, we asked the same question and talked about it last time. I got encouraged to watch the video. They sent us both the links. One of them was to 2013 or something.
it
but
was, yeah.
I eventually figured it out.
I did too. I watched them again.
And it was really helpful. The biggest argument that I agree with you, your conversation in that video, because if I can
Sure.
paraphrase you, Councilwoman Clear was asking the same questions. Yeah, but okay, this is important, but isn't everything else important too? Why would this be more important? And frankly, with the questions I just asked, I watched those videos first, so thinking about that discussion really framed my look through the questions and so on. There was a little bit of misinformation, I would say. I think you were right. Everything that's come on this list that became either part of the social service block grant or got line item, at some point was a proposal that came in from the outside that some council adopted in the year. It might not be exactly the same year, but the year that the healthcare access came on, there have been others. For instance, one year the director of the United Way wanted to propose a one-stop shop and wanted $46,000 and some change to do that. And of course had a fair amount of swing with the city council at the time, as you can imagine, and got it and got a line item for it, and everybody else got cut to do it. And those things can and do happen. So obviously when, I don't know that the city initiated the partnership that started the healthcare access and equal substantial amounts of funding from both the city and the county at first, but they got asked if they were willing to do it, and enough people said yes that they did it. Healthcare access still exists. The one-stop shop, just as an example, didn't work out very well and eventually went away. It's hosted by KCSL, who's doing other things, but isn't doing that anymore. So yeah, you can't just make assumptions about the history and how something
Well, and it's
got
just
there.
really hard to answer how. There's just some strong opinions on the committee that they should. And it's kind of a agree to disagree kind of.
Well, there were only two of you voting that day, well, talking about it that one day.
Right, but then it came down to the 3 votes. And
And just in terms of times changing, because I was
It
around for
is.
this, I mean, when what is now Positive Connections, it started out as the Topeka AIDS Project came on, AIDS was epidemic and nobody knew what to do. People were dying all the time. People that had been engaged in inappropriate or in activity with infected people, either knowingly engaged or accidentally, like in the case of an emergency or first responder or something like that. It was epidemic and the city stepped up and kicked in some money. Times have changed substantially. They're doing, it's much more under control now. It's still important.
Yeah.
It's still important to maintain for the lives that are involved. Right now, I guess, depending on how you want to spin it, whether we're helping with the admin, which is one way it gets, you've pitched it in the letter, but otherwise that it's the equivalent of the care, not the drugs, but the care for 25 people. Again, apparently all the clients don't live in Topeka. All of the 25?
Oh, yeah.
But of the 200 that are?
All of the 200 do not.
Uh-huh. And I wasn't clear from the letter how many were or weren't, or it's just the issue of,
So what are your thoughts?
Fundraising.
What are your thoughts on, I mean, we revisit that.
Well, here's a kind of out-of-the-box suggestion that would address both of them. One would be that really when we look at how we divide up at the top between
Uh-huh.
emergency aid and prevention and counseling, particularly because we had an agency that didn't get funded at all, we ended up dropping even a hair below 10% on emergency aid. There were some passionate pitches made for direct help to individuals, particularly because of health access last time. It seems to me that probably that it could be, the case could be made to consider to put Shawnee County Health Access up in the emergency aid category with the other direct cash assistance providers. Because what we're using that money for is to buy prescriptions. Is that right? So it's, the others that are doing utilities, food, prescriptions. That would help that category. If the 50,000 that they'd gotten had popped into that category for this current year, it would still only be at 20% of all the funding we were giving out, but it would be a little more accurate reflection of how much emergency aid we're doing. And there's a good chance that another agency would come back in, the one that didn't get funded would come back and want to get funded. There's still plenty of room in how we've described this 25% threshold. If we took the grandfathering off, but moved Shawnee County Health Access up there, but also made a corresponding commitment that we absolutely wanted either 20 or 25% of the funding in the whole pot to go to that direct aid, so that if agencies came in and asked for X or Y amount of money, that we gave them additional funds up until we were committing at least
Oh, I see.
that amount. I mean, this is so flexible, we could fund anywhere from 10% to 40% for the direct aid, and that has dropped all the way to 10% just by the way the grants have gone. So we could put them up there and make a fixed amount that we wanted to spend.
So it wouldn't be a flat grant request? It would just be the difference of, and then what if that puts us over our budget limit?
Well, obviously, what happens is that if you don't have enough money, you spread it out. You either spread it out based on what's available for anybody that scored over X amount, or you go from the top down and you say you have to have scored over X, and we're gonna award money until we're out. We've done it both ways.
I think this is something to think about.
But if we took the grandfathering off, that would loosen up more money within the 440,000.
But it wouldn't stop the caps on the
Okay.
25.
So, can I give you a
Sure,
little
'cause I
piece of
don't-
information just while you're
Yes.
debating this? So, in 2019, your total requested amount was 79,000 in emergency aid.
Right.
And let me back up. 25% of your whole pot of 440 is 110,000, right? So that's your kind of
Max.
max amount in emergency services based on the discussion with budget. They're not giving you any more money.
Well,
So-
but this lets us swing up to 40%, the way we've approved it in the past.
40%, oh, because of 15.
Uh-huh.
Okay, right on. So,
That's
but
okay,
you're-
keep talking.
So you're at 79 currently is the request, and I believe all of those were funded.
No, they weren't.
Who did not get funded? Let's help.
Catholic Charities.
Catholic Charities.
So we only funded 41,929, which comes out at 9.5%.
Yeah. So if you took that 50,000
And then-
funding amount for positive connections,
No, the
Shawnee Medical Society and moved it up there, you would still
Oh,
be,
if we just moved them
Right.
up there anyway, and then
Right.
if the cap's off, let's say they were up there and they got 25,000, Doorstep got 22.5, Let's Help got 19,
The-
that would put us only at 67,000. If we wanted to set absolutely that we wanted 20% or 25%, let's say 25% to go to direct aid.
which the plus or minus 15% does give you that room.
It gives us that, but we've never, we thought the 10% was a floor that we would never get to, and we did.
Well, when we pulled the contracted services out of there, that was a couple $100,000, and that's where your
They were never in there.
floor were.
None of them were ever in there.
Emergency, they were not?
Uh-uh,
Okay.
uh-uh.
I do want to say that the emergency aid and the prevention side, the percentage that they get, the 95 or 90% of their score is not different for emergency aid. So if they score a 60, no matter where they're at on emergency aid or prevention, they're not going to get funded.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, why would you change this from just being grandfathered in? Why would it, what would make it look different? Why would you,
Well, they would know now that they were not gonna get that extra, they needed to replace that extra money by 2020.
but it may not be extra money. If we have to bump it up to the 40%,
The emergency, that would allow us to go higher in emergency
$25,000
aid.
cap would be would be all they could apply for, I think is what she's
It would be all
proposing.
they could apply for, but if it turned out, if we wanted to say that we wanted a minimum amount of this to go to direct aid, if the qualifying applications, there were 3, and they were for 25,000 apiece because they got maxed out, and that was $75,000. But we chose to go with 25%, which is 110, then we could proportionally give extra money to those who had applied in order to hit our chosen threshold of doing X amount of dollars in emergency aid.
who else, who's that gonna affect on the other end?
It's gonna make less money available for counseling and prevention. I mean, this time, 90% of the money went to counseling and
Because
prevention.
there wasn't anybody that,
Because we did not, because we had dropped one out and didn't have the numbers up in emergency
so you'd have to
aid.
change you're really gonna change this whole process then?
But it would also, if neither of those were grandfathered, just for starters, it would put another, let me get my math right, 25 plus 16, $41,000 in the mix. Somewhere.
Well, except it will take away from preventive and counseling, which messes up this formula.
Formula is pretty fluid. The balance could be anywhere between 90% prevention and counseling and 10% social services, with the way it sits today, the way it's been the last couple of years, or only 60% and all the way to 60% in counseling and prevention and 40% in direct aid.
But do we want to pick and choose? Because I'm not really following what you're saying or why. I mean, I'm trying to get there. Do we want to pick and choose? Somebody got a 50, but they're emergency aid, so we give them the money?
No, I don't think
No.
that's what she's proposing. What she's saying,
It's complicated.
what
I'm
she's
lost.
saying is you guys would set that minimum funding amount in emergency services at 25% of the total, right? So that gets you to the 110 amount. So everybody that applied in emergency aid would get that 110 split up among them, which could be in excess of 25,000, the cap. So-
Everyone who applied and met the scoring.
Yes,
criteria.
based on their score, you could be giving additional funding to these emergency aid folks above 25,000. She's not disputing what you're saying, that if you move some of that money from the big pot into the little pot, then people in the big pot are not gonna get funded. She's not arguing that. But she's saying throw out the grandfathered folks, set a hard cap on your emergency aid of not less than 25%. And then, although Midlet, one more time, Shawnee Medical Society wouldn't be guaranteed 50,000, they would have the possibility of getting additional funding
Or less.
or less.
Okay, so what about Positive Connections? They'd stay at, you said no, don't
No,
grandfather.
she was talking
What-
about Shawnee
Well,
County
It would be
Medical.
capped if there'd be no way there's such demand that anybody in the prevention and counseling would get more than 25,000 with, if the cap from last year is continued.
So what are you saying? Their cap would be 25,
Yes,
because they'll stay in counseling and prevention. And Shawnee Medical would be looked at as the emergency.
would be up under direct aid.
Which,
yeah.
here's
Direct
the feedback that the agencies have given us consistently over this past year. Don't change the formula. They want
don't
to
wanna
know
change the
what the formula is. The changing it from year to year, to your point, led to that kind of request creep where they figured out on the backside, which good on them, that they're smart, and they figured out what we're doing in terms of the formula, but it just resulted in their requests were doubled and tripled in some cases. So it's
Right.
not helpful to keep kind of messing with the formula. I think that the message that we've gotten from the agencies is keep it consistent so we know what to expect.
And the
That's
committee,
The feedback.
and the committees that come up. You know, that's what they've been working for, is to try to get something that's, we can keep consistent.
But if we keep the grandfathering, there's no fluidity for anything. Because it was the intent at first to come up with a way to fund the agencies that were doing good stuff and that really needed the money. At this point, some years into a formula-based allocation, not much is gonna change.
And I think that's okay.
When the cap was, that $25,000 application cap was.
That raised everybody.
Was set because the
Stop the
committee.
creep.
Well, that, and it was kind of a dollar amount that we felt like would give as many agencies a shot at funding as possible, where we weren't giving, $75,000 or $60,000 to one agency. Everybody got,
We funded more agencies.
that was the intent that year of that cap. And that's what the committee was, the goal was.
Right.
I think it'll happen again, just like it happened, there'll be some compelling opportunity or proposal, like what happened when
Well,
the health access was started and when AIDS came around, that it got those numbers up and got them kicked in and going.
well, if it's time to put them at a max, I don't want to change everybody's formula, but if you're suggesting that we put Shawnee Medical max 25, Positive Connections max 25, along with everybody else, then we can talk about that. But I don't want to mess with the,
Well, I guess I was reacting to watching the videos, and there was one person in particular who was very passionate about getting that direct aid out to people. Now, the argument gets made the same way, that direct aid is critical because people need to eat and they need to have their utilities on to survive, and the corresponding same argument that the prevention and counseling is critical because if you feed a man for a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach him to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. Both are important, and we've tried to balance that. That's why I went back and thought, well, if there is a sense on this committee, if there's not, that's fine. But because obviously the helping agencies are finding funds someplace else, and it's a little easier to raise money for cash assistance than for the prevention and counseling, at least in my experience. And so if letting that drop to 10%, or if we want to put, have healthcare access up there in direct aid.
That makes sense.
Is that the best you think?
Moving them up into the emergency aid category, I think, but.
That gets us up
I
closer
would
to
defer
20%.
To Corey and Rochelle,
in
because
what
they're
we
really
do.
the experts, but it makes sense in my mind.
As long as it
because
doesn't mess with everything else.
It is.
That would be
kind of
lateral in a way.
emergency aid, I
Mhm.
think. Would you guys, what do you think? Does it make sense to put them up there?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my personal opinion would be to put them up there, to leave it at plus or minus 15% and not make them a special category as far as the percentage of their score. Because
Okay.
I don't want to make it more competitive for the rent and utility assistance
Right.
people, because we certainly need that in the community. And we would be then making it more competitive for them unduly
Right,
just
right.
by moving them up there.
Well-
So I was concerned with that a little bit, and I also would still recommend us grandfathering both of the agencies in at their current level. That's just my personal opinion.
I mean, that's the deal, because if we don't drop it, there's no extra money or movement in any way for anybody else. Next year will look just like this year, likely.
I want to hear what Ms. Ortiz has to
Right.
say.
So I was just, if there was a feeling that people wanted to see a certain amount of direct assistance, that was one way
I
to do it.
I think last year was unfortunate that Catholic Charities didn't score high enough, but I have a feeling that they will
Come back.
come back strong.
Okay.
So then tell me about this, why do we have this plus or minus 15%? Why is that in there?
To make it work, because we're kind of throwing a dart by saying 25% of your, you know what I'm saying? That-
No, because what if prevention and counseling, you could go up to 90%, 90% of the people. Okay, so what if
90% of funding, yeah.
40% went up, I mean, I don't know.
I think you're
what-
mixing some apples and oranges.
Maybe. You might be right, this is numbers.
I mean, when this first started, there was a desire to not spend all the money on emergency aid. That's often popular and
Why
very
is it
compelling.
separate? Why isn't
Well-
it just all,
That's what I was explaining.
oh, I'm sorry.
And so by putting the 25% in to give a target figure, and then allowing, I think we only had a 5% variation in those first years. Does that sound right, Corey? It was just a 5%, and then I don't recall whether it went up particularly or down particularly. So in the course of time, a 15% stretch got put in there.
But why can't it just be social services grants? And why do we have that?
It could be now. I mean, it has dropped so much, if that makes it simpler.
I just don't see why we have that at all.
There were no caps before, and so the emergency aid folks could come in every year and say they needed $70,000.
Oh, but now that
Pays
there's,
for it.
but now that there's caps,
Understood, but I'm just saying it's changed,
I
and so
mean,
that's why.
so it wouldn't matter now? Is that what you're
Not
saying?
as much.
Doesn't sound like it, no.
I don't
It's a
think
good
so.
point.
And you've got all of those areas in terms of the priorities and
Right.
listed, which includes emergency housing and utility assistance, so.
And medical.
Yeah,
Then it
I-
doesn't matter what, but that's why it happened at first, because there was no cap, and they wanted to make sure
Oh, I get it.
that not more
Okay.
than 30% went to direct aid, because people felt
Got
that
it.
the counseling and prevention is really important.
Okay, so we need your ideas, thoughts, concerns about the grandfathered in. We've had two kind of suggestions, ideas. One is to cap them both at 25. And the other, but if we don't have this top part, take out the emergency aid and preventive counseling, then it'd just be the caps at the 25.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Karen. I think times have changed now. Now we got CanCare, there used to be a time when we couldn't get anything. And I've actually had constituents I can't think of his name, who was over the access, but that couldn't get prescriptions, and so I've always kind of had a, you know. So I don't know what to qualify, what the qualifications are, but when you have constituents saying, no, I couldn't get that, I think times have changed, and I would agree, just take it out and let that cap go. I never really liked the grandfather because it kind of gives them a precedence, and that's not really fair to, I mean, we're all in it to we all serve the same people, and I agree. I think aides have come along. We now have our new healthcare center, Grace Med, that's done a great job of serving everybody, anybody and everybody. So maybe that's something that we could look at. It's kind of, you know, I used to be at work our United Way champion and to get people going. And one of the things that they did wrong, and I will say this over and over again, is when they start telling people where they could put their money, you know, and they want you to give, but you can't tell them where they're going to use their money, and that's what they did wrong. And they lost a lot of people at work. A lot of people won't give anymore because they want to give their money to kids or the elderly. And when you say, well, we'll take your money, but you can't, they don't like that. So that's something they did wrong. And it's kind of spindled, you know, down through the agencies. But if you're going to ask people to give, you got to let them. But see, that kind of put them in a category that they only had, you know, where they could have the money and stuff. And that's one of the things with medication. People will give to the elderly for medication, but when you say, you know, you don't have a say in it, just give me your money, that's kind of when it's really dropped. So I would agree. I'd agree, just put the 25 cap and move from there.
So does either Shawnee Medical Society or Positive Connection want to speak?
I'm Carla Hedquist. I'm the director of the Health Access Program. We are a program of the Shawnee County Medical Society. We were started in 2002 to assist low-income, uninsured residents of Shawnee County with access to medical care that's donated and prescriptions. So there are people that don't qualify for a medical card because they make too much. They don't qualify for Affordable Care Act because they don't make enough to qualify for the subsidy. So they're the working folks right down the middle. We have 3 eligibility criteria. Councilman Ortiz, I can't speak to your constituent, but I know a lot of our folks live in your area who meet those criteria, the working poor. They need to live here in Shawnee County, not have any other kind of health coverage, and make less than 150% of federal poverty, which is $1,518 a month for a household of 1. Actually, almost 80% of our patients actually make less than 100% of federal poverty, which is about $1,000, a little over $1,000 a month. So it's awfully hard, even if you're working, to be able to afford that premium for health coverage. So when the program started, the Medical Society was working with both of our local hospitals and our medical community because they knew that charity care wasn't kind of flowing smoothly or coordinated. And so it was an attempt to make our safety net system more efficient by providing access to primary care, access to specialty care, and the missing piece of that was prescriptions. The hospitals agreed to donate, physicians agreed to donate, but it doesn't do any good for those entities to donate to the tune of $15 million last year if people can't get their prescription and get well. You can say, yes, you've got a seizure disorder, but if you can't get those prescriptions, then it doesn't help. You can say, yes, you've got an ear infection, but if you can't get your prescriptions, or diabetes, or whatever it is. We are very good with the money that we get. We ask that people apply for Affordable Care Act. We ask them apply directly to the manufacturers. We only do generics. We don't ever do narcotics. But the goal is to really help people get well. I'm a little bit concerned about being moved to emergency aid. I like what you say about direct assistance because we are directly helping patients with their prescriptions. But there are emergency aid prescription providers in our community when people don't have the copay, even though they've got health coverage maybe, but they don't have the copay to pay. We are for people that have nothing. And they do have a $9 copay with health access. And sometimes they have to go to the emergency providers to even be able to pay for that. But what we cover is more of the preventive, long-term things that people are on. The monthly maintenance medications that they need to take to be able to stay well and work and take care of their property. So, yes, when we first started, the city and the county both equally agreed to fund us at $125,000 each. Next year, we'll get $105 from the county and $48,000 from the city. So the city has gradually, over the years, and it was not based on outcomes. It was based on, cuts to social service funding across the board to all of us. And so I guess my question to you, when, radically cutting $25,000 worth of prescriptions from individuals, I'd ask you to look at our outcomes. And if it's based on the fact that we didn't serve enough people, we're serving 1,600 people a month on average. I think our goal this year is 9,000 prescriptions that the city will help us pay. If it's a cut based on us not providing the services to the residents of the city, then that's one thing. But just kind of let's just cut 25,000 doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The person that I sent you does have seizures and was not able to get help. But that pushed us back to go into the pharmaceuticals, and the pharmaceutical took that application and gave her her medicine for free.
Yeah. If they're
Because-
eligible for the
Well, hold on,
manufacturer, we want them to.
Hold on, because that's the biggest complaint right there is the seizure people, because their medicines is like 500, 600, 800. And nobody wants to talk about seizures, nobody wants to talk about epilepsy. But you're right, we've got to figure something out, because sometimes they're not able to work. And then they can't even get their prescription filled, so guess what's happening? They're having other difficulties, and they're having seizures on seizures on seizures. So if that's something that you guys can't fund, because it's a lot of money, then I would like to know that, because that was the lady that came to me and said they can't help me.
Yeah, we do have an upper max. We have $1,000 a year per patient and $200 per prescription per month. And then it's also generics only. So my
And that's
question
another
might
thing,
be.
some of them cannot take generic,
And so a lot of the ones that are still name brands, people can apply directly to the manufacturer to get it free or reduced price. And that's why we're saying, if you can do that, we want you to do that and not use the health access money for that.
I don't think that was ever told to that person like that. It was just like, no, we can't help after, and it wasn't you. It was a long time ago. And it was after after they finally got a hold of the director to figure out what to do. And that was another thing, is they had a hard time with the process. And I would hope the process is easier, that people can fill something out or get, because I even tried as well. And then I remember that gentleman, I can't remember his name, he had came, and I'm like, I need your card, because, she had so much of a difficulty. So that's kind of why I have I guess when I give money, I want to make sure that we're able to help, because we've got diabetes, now see, this is all new, that they can only do 200 a month, which I understand you probably do have to have a cap, because, you got diabetes, you got high blood pressure, and now, like myself, I'm on high blood pressure medicine, but I cannot take the generic brand. I have to have, generic does nothing for me,
Yeah.
Luckily I have insurance, so I have to go through some red tape there, but to say we only do generic, then how many people are like me?
Unfortunately, there's folks in every category.
Right.
And that when we're entrusted with a finite amount of money, we don't want to run out of it the first month And so we need to figure out a formulary, and we have physicians making those decisions about what's on the formulary, what's an equal alternative but less expensive. And last year, we were about $38,000 over budget in the prescription line item that we had to take out of reserves, because the cost of generic prescriptions is increasing so much. And so, you know, that would be a reason for your outcomes or your number served to be reduced, is if the cost increased to provide the service. And so, you know, we reduced our number of claims by making formulary adjustments. We reduced the claims by like 20,000 claims last year. We reduced the cost of our prescription budget by $1,000 by making formulary adjustments. The cost of prescriptions is what's killing us. And so a $25,000 cut to our program for prescriptions for low-income uninsured would hurt. It would hurt a lot of folks who, like you say, are needing their prescriptions to be able to work and to be productive.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any question about what a wonderful job you do.
And that's why it.
And the coordination, as you've described before and did a little bit again today, to pull everybody together, that is invaluable, actually.
Yeah, and that's why cutting your budget in half when it's not based on outcomes is hard.
Understood.
Thank you.
So first, I understand that HIV is complicated. So I'll try to kind of explain a little bit. One of the reasons that so most of our funding comes from federal legislation that's called the Ryan White Care Act. And you are right, Councilman Hiller, that initially when we started receiving money from the city, HIV was an epidemic. They didn't know what to do with it. Unfortunately, it's treatable now. That's fortunate. But what's happening is we're seeing younger people who have not received the education that our generation has received. And so our new infections are coming in 18 to 25-year-olds. Primarily, and so because they're not getting the education that they need. So while it's not as pandemic as it was at one point, it's very much affecting a new population that we've got a lot of people that are aging and living healthy with HIV, but we've got a lot of new people that are coming in kind of, I don't want to say replacing those people, but with a whole new set of problems. And we too, a lot of our people are low income, below the poverty level. So what we do is we connect them to medical care. Ryan White legislation requires that be the payer of last resort. So if they're eligible for Medicaid, Medicare, employer-based insurance, any type of other insurance, they have to take that. And then if they have another kind of insurance, we help them with the co-pays that come out of pocket for their medications. HIV medication, there's a lot of it available today, and it is a manageable illness, but all of those medications are about $1,800 a month. So even if they are insured, their copay is often very high. So with our services, we are able then to help them meet that copay and get them covered, because it's, when it comes down to a choice of do I have a place to live or do I take my medications, people often choose to have a place to live. And that's just the reality of it. We have several clients that are homeless. We work very closely with Shelter Plus Care, which is a wonderful program and has got about 25 to 30 of our clients in housing. In answer to your question, about 75% of our clients are city residents, primarily in zip codes 05, 07, and 12, but also throughout the city. One of the new things, so one of the really great outcomes that we have is that about 80% of our people reach an undetectable viral load. And just last year, this is 2018, in 2017, the Centers for Disease Control said that if you achieve and maintain an undetectable viral load, you have virtually no chance of transmitting the virus to other people. Which means that we're finding a way to get HIV under control. But they have to have access to medical care in order to reach that undetectable viral load. And so nationwide, about 49% of people with HIV have reached an undetectable viral load. Here in Topeka, we've done a fantastic job, and about 85% of our clients, 80 to 85% of our clients have an undetectable viral load. That's because of what we do. If we don't do what we do, and if we don't have the money to do what we do, those viral loads are going to go back up because those medications are not going to be available to these people. And if those viral loads go back up, it does impact the safety of our first responders, whether it be police, whether it be fire, whether it be hospital personnel. Usually are not working in such an emergency situation that they can't take universal precautions, but sometimes police and fire are not. And that is, right now, we can say that we contribute to the safety of the community and to the safety of our first responders. Without medications, that may not be the case. And yes, we've got it somewhat under control in Topeka, but that's only because our services have been here. And that's only because we are able to help the people that we serve. Ryan White legislation also requires that they are the payer of last resort and that there be other funds that are coming in. So we have to have that local support in order to be able to access the Ryan White money for our people. One other thing that I did want to, when you were speaking earlier about budgets and on paper and looking at that, right now, if you look at us on paper, we look a lot more flush than we did a few years ago. That is due to the fact that when Marion Clinic closed, the Sisters of Charity bought the floor that we owned, and which allowed us to purchase a building that we now live in and don't ever have to move again. Which is great, but that allowed us to purchase a building. So that has added to our bottom line, like on our budget. It looks like, because of the value of the building, it looks like we have more money, but that doesn't mean we have more cash, if that makes sense. So there's that audit adjustment piece that goes in there, and it makes it look like our net worth has increased, which it has, because we own the building, but not because we have more cash flow. Your funds are very important to what we do, and your funds are very important to the residents of Topeka, both the ones that are living with HIV, the ones that are at risk for HIV or for infection, and the ones that are responding to our first responders in our community. So it was difficult to, last year, we lost a lot of funding when United Way changed their priorities. We lost about $50,000 when they changed their priorities. The city has been very generous in stepping up to that. They never funded the $50,000 that we lost. And that was not all in the case management program. That was also in our HIV prevention program. But the city's been very generous in that, but I don't know where we would find a replacement for what the city currently provides to us. And so while we are doing well in Topeka with maintaining, it's kind of like you mentioned chronic illnesses and that's kind of what HIV has become, but it's a very expensive chronic illness. And what we do keeps people able to work. It keeps them contributing to the community. Some people are at that point where they're no longer able to work, but we can help people maintain an HIV diagnosis rather than an AIDS diagnosis for many years. But we have to have the services available to them. So that's really all I've got. I would beg you. I don't like begging, but I would really tell you how important the funding that you guys provide to us really is. Because without it, I don't know that we could maintain the levels of services that we do. So,
Thank you. Anyone else here like to speak? Anything from staff, from? Okay, my concern was, if we could call up, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, Jayhawk Area and Aging, and they would all have a compelling, like you said earlier, they'd have a compelling argument too that, on who they can and can't help with the funding. So it was difficult. But I would like to take a vote on this and then vote on all three that goes before the council.
What is your inclination after getting to think about it for 5 or 10 minutes more?
About
combining that's a new idea for us, and so.
See, I would rather take out the top. I struggled with the grandfathering last year, so I'm okay with that because I've gotten past that, I guess. And I didn't see it where it affected, I just didn't see that it affected anything else. So I didn't have a problem with that. So what I would like is to take out this social service, the percentage, leave them grandfathered in and carry on like we did last year because it worked. I didn't see anything that didn't work because of it.
Take the percent out, but leave the grandfathering.
Yeah. Because I was you last year.
I know.
But it worked. And this is just one of those things that a prior committee did. And so I kind of respect what they did, what they went through, what they struggled with.
But it's live, and if we go with the 440,000, then all it takes is one agency to come back and everybody will be cut.
One little piece of information on that 440. We need to confirm for you all if that includes the 61,000 and some change in CDBG funding. I'm not positive that it does. Nick wasn't sure. It does. Okay. Never
So
mind.
that is
It
the
does.
total.
That's it. Sorry.
No, that's good.
Well, but the only thing, even if 2 more people was funded, I mean, what is it, $10,000 or something? I mean, I just don't, just cut Nick's salary for $10,000.
I did clarify too, there were comments made in the meeting last year that people got funded under 10, and that did happen before, but I went back and we did not do that with anybody for 2019. So even if some people asked for 10, but we've gotten away from awarding anything under 10.
Well, they didn't make the cut, right?
Well, on here, on the priority sheet, it says that the minimum grant amount is 10,000, not the minimum ask amount. And so that's looks like that didn't have to get addressed in 2019. It has in the past,
Huh.
when people scored okay, but then when you started spreading the money down.
I don't know. I mean, you know me well enough. I just think if it works, I don't mess with it until it's broken. And and you and I've talked about, we work well because you think of all the particulars, all that can happen, and I don't do that. So it's good to have both of these thoughts. What are your thoughts, Councilmember
Well,
Ortiz?
I struggle with the grandfather, because I like to be fair across the board.
Across
I
the board.
mean, you know, there's other agencies that say, if you cut my funding, I
I know.
can't serve,
Yeah.
you know, and I struggle with that. Maybe what we could do is maybe, you know, fund them next year and then say with the caveat, we're gonna start cutting back or something.
If we're gonna do it, what happens is if that gets discussed now, they have 18 months, 15 months. They know well in advance, it's not a waffle,
Right.
that's where it is, and that's one of the, it's a difficult for us, but at least right now, we are not in that funding cycle at all. The committee is making recommendations that the council would adopt well in advance. If this group is gonna stay with the 440, then if the grandfathering stays and another agency comes in, everybody gets cut. Or it could happen that way, and the committee will have to face that. If everybody stays and there's one more that gets $25,000, that's gonna come out of everybody that's there. If the grandfathering goes off, then there's money for some fluidity and/or for somebody to come back.
However, what if the next committee says, okay, so we go, you know, we're gonna cut you in a couple years, the next committee goes, no, we're not. We're gonna leave it like, you know?
They
I
can
think
do
that's
that.
what their problem is, everybody
They can do that.
But
moves.
we have, the committees have not done that, though, and then one of the reasons that this system is set up the way it is that it goes with the process, the priorities, and the budget number right after the current year's process has ended. And once the council has signed on with that, it's not that it couldn't happen, but that committee that comes on the next year is expected to fulfill that round in the way that it was agreed. And then if they want to change it, they do what we're doing now
Right.
and change it, but with time and not the pressure of the grants being right there, and go to the council, and then once it's agreed, again, so that it's not a surprise. Getting cut is hard. What's worse is getting cut at the last minute when you didn't expect it.
What is staff side thoughts?
Well, I've already given you mine. I don't think you were in the room, but my recommendation was to grandfather them in at the same rate and use the same process that we had last year, which I heard 0 complaints from the agencies about. So that was exciting for me that we didn't have anybody that was really concerned about that.
And I think before we would cut, I think we would raise the bar, is what I would suggest, instead of cutting everybody.
It wouldn't cut everybody, by the way, it would cut the bottom person.
Right, that's true.
Well, we've done it both ways, and it just sort of depends on how the numbers fall and what that committee
The
makes
way-
the final decision to do.
Yeah, the way that the scenario is on the priority sheet is
Right.
that if they score 90%, they get 90% of what they requested. So essentially, if there was money short on the table, it would come from the last agency that applied. So it could potentially make the funding mark a little bit higher in those regards. But it would be that last person getting the funding cut, not all the agencies. They all wouldn't receive a cut. It would be just the bottom ones.
Which 18 was the first year that I think we did it that way. And in prior years, you'll remember that we messed with the percentage to cut off of
God.
everybody's. It was
Talk about math, it was
confusing
confusing today.
and, yeah, probably not very objective and just,
But it's gonna be problematic, because as we pull up that minimum score, it's already, what, it was at 89% this year, so if it would be at, but if there are, let's say, 6 agencies that scored 89, the committee will be challenged to figure out how to distribute the money. They just will,
Well, that's a B. You can shoot for an A.
just,
Teacher talk. Okay, so we have now her idea, which we could grandfather them in, leave it as it is with a information that in 2021,
Well, and I think that would give us time to see, are we duplicating services, anywhere?
Well, I do think, and maybe, I mentioned it briefly, but seems like over time, and on an average of once every 5 years, the big funders all got together and kind of compared notes and looked at what had changed in terms of priorities or dollars available for their own funding sources, who they were funding, how that balance has worked, and so on. To see if they wanted to change their priorities or do some mutual agreements. So one I remember was one year, I think we were all involved, but the city and the county ran simultaneous social services pots. And so everybody applied to both of them.
Yep.
There were traditions of who the county had funded and who the city had funded, but of course, when people needed more money, they applied to both, and in time, there was a lot of duplication, but not necessarily in the split, a lot of money on either side. And so the city and the county kind of compared notes and said, well, let's reduce the burden on the agencies, and let's say you'll take these and we'll take these, and slim it up. And that always works for a while, and then in time, things can change again. But it's been a long time, United Way's now been doing their new way for what, 3 years? Three?
I think
Four?
four or
Okay.
five.
And they may be about, I know they look at it anyway, maybe about due to look at it again, even anticipating things like that. So maybe next year's a good time for the committee to, even, the city could take the lead. I don't know that we have, but we could.
your motion on anything? Well, then I will move, here's another idea. What if we task the next committee with it? If we say, and it kind of goes along with that, grandfather 'em in, leave it like it is, with the request that the committee next year,
Do the kind of summit.
yeah, and then look at these two. Does that sound all right?
Just to clarify, since we've talked about what you wanted before.
Okay.
When you say grandfathering, and if you're looking at this priority sheet, it would look the same except.
No, I was leaving that for priorities. I was just doing the funding first.
Oh, well, this sheet has.
Oh, you're
the
right,
total funding.
it's on the same sheet.
It has the
Yes.
grandfathering and it
You're
has
right.
the split between emergency aid
You're
and
right.
preventive.
So I would move that on the social services funding priorities, we remove the top, leave everything else the same.
You want to remove the emergency aid and preventative
Yes,
counseling
the
and that
percent stuff.
percentages, okay?
But somewhere, I don't know where we would put this then, to make sure that the committee next year knows
I think
that
would be
they
on the
need
calendar.
to, oh, okay,
That would probably be most appropriate on the calendar.
that they knew to look at that. That would be my motion. Now, do I have to re-say that? Got it?
They're gonna approve this document again next year, so it'll be on there, so they'll know to
Okay.
relook at it. If-
Okay, I move that. All in favor, say aye.
Oh, okay.
What?
Can we do them one at a time? I know you want to roll through them. Go right.
No, I was just doing this paper.
She was only doing the priority sheet,
Okay.
and she's
Yes,
suggesting that you
yes, this
remove
is all I'm
the
doing.
top percentage section where we're separating emergency aid and preventative and counseling.
All right. And
But leave
leaving
the
every-
rest of it the same.
Right, that's the only proposal I'm making, the only motion I'm making right now. So all those in favor say
We
aye.
didn't get a second yet.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, now the calendar.
Make a motion to approve the calendar as presented.
Well, as amended, we had one thing we discussed earlier and one thing we discussed just now.
We added process into
Right.
the second block under communication.
Okay, add process there.
And then if you want to, we could put that note that you just talked about at the bottom of this, just recommendation that next year's group meet with county drug and alcohol, United Way, and other funders. And, I don't know, I've got kind of a long sentence that I played with, oddly, that you brought that up.
Okay, well, so
I don't,
she made the motion. Do you want to amend the motion then?
well, if the consensus that's building is that we would add the and process at the top, and we would add a statement at the bottom recommending that next year's committee take the time to meet with the other major funders and compare notes before they set their,
And why are we doing that?
you're the one who suggested that.
No, I think,
You did?
no, but I followed up on somebody. I was suggesting that they look at in 18 months, reducing the grandfathering or doing away with that or something. That's what I was suggesting they look at.
Well, they'll do that because it's their job 12 months from now, whoever next year's committee is to look at this and do this again. And they'll do the same thing we did.
Right, but we would now be giving them a heads up, hey, instead of just chopping it now.
You can write that in your report
Mm-hmm.
that you submit to the council.
And not put it on here?
I think they're on notice. You
think
guys
so?
agree? Yeah.
But I'd
Okay.
still
Okay.
finalize and put that in your report. It's gonna be in the
Okay.
minutes anyway. yeah.
And we can put a statement below that says that the 2018 committee recommends meeting with United Way in Shawnee County to discuss.
But why are we doing that?
To discuss social service funding in the community. And I think her point was they've met in the past to kind of divvy it up. You guys fund this group and we'll fund this group so that we don't have, if I understood correctly, so that we don't have multiple agencies applying to all of the funders.
Who cares?
Because we're trying to target dollars to where they're most needed. And what happens is.
But they're most needed.
This committee gets isolated from the trends. The city isn't
I don't
doing the
think they care.
research.
I don't think that matters. They also apply to the 15 they can get from Missouri, or they can get from, you're not going to stop that unless you meet with everybody that you can get a grant from. I don't want to recommend. I thought there was
I was saying to look at the grandfather, clause.
Yeah.
Right, and she was saying she'd put that in the minutes, and you could put that in part of your report that we considered it, but thought that not this year, but surely the committee
Right.
would want to look at it next year.
Yeah, it'll come up in this priority sheet.
It'll
It's
easily
gonna
come up.
Guarantee it.
So she has made a motion to approve this. You want to make a motion to amend, to add that process?
I think there was consensus to add in
Right,
process,
right.
and so I think her motion was that, and that's fine.
And then anything else I could just add and mention in the,
report.
okay?
Sure.
So we have a second?
So we're not making the statement that we'll be meeting.
No, I'll
next-
just put it in the, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Say nay. Okay. Anything else? Schedule next meeting. We do not have a next meeting then. It goes to the council.
It does. So let's do one thing just for staff before we break. Let's talk about what's going to be in the packet for the city council. Calendar, priority sheet, review committee selection guidelines.
Application.
You want the RFP and
That's
the
fine.
score
And the score
sheet?
sheet.
Because we don't have this paper application anymore. That's why you guys have actually an application. But we can, in the packet, we can put the RFP
Okay.
with the score sheet.
Okay. That's
And
it,
then,
right?
and that's it for
Right.
this action that goes to
Right.
council. Yes, because, yes.
Right, Karen?
Yes, I have to talk to a Cub Scout troop at 5:30.
Okay.
Okay,
So, we're at NOMA and So nothing else. So now next is adjourn. Okay.
Thank you.
Adjourn the meeting. Thank you for coming.